My player that I'm going to bring up for, I think, arguably one of the worst free agent signings in the history of the NHL is a Toronto Maple Leaf, or was a Toronto Maple Leaf rather, but probably not the guy that you're thinking of. So, so a lot of people are probably thinking that I'm going to bring up David Clarkson, and yeah, I could. He played in New Jersey. He was a 30-goal scorer. The Leafs said, "We like goals. Have a bunch of money." And that didn't work out. I think he had like 12 points the following year or something. So that was a bad signing. But because that's more well known and because there is a little bit of a story behind this player, I'm going to go with Jeff Finger, another Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman who was signed in 2008 by the Leafs for 14 million for 4 years. So that's an AAV of 3.5 million. So Finger was 27 years old at the time, and he'd only played 94 NHL games with Colorado in parts of, I think, 2 or 3 seasons before signing. So if you go back to 2008, so that's when Steven Stamkos was drafted first overall, by the way. And we think of Stamkos now as like an aging player in the league. A while ago. So 3.5 million. Let's just think about that number. At the time, 8 years into their careers, the Sedin brothers, okay? Guess how much they were making? 3.575 million apiece. Just a little bit more than Jeff Finger, okay? 0.75 million. They were 8 years into their careers at the time, and you can say what you want about, whether these guys took pay cuts to stay together or whatever. They were two of the best players in the league at the time, and they were making 3.575 million. A couple other players at the time, Todd Bertuzzi, Rod Brindamore. Yeah, ever heard of them? NHL legends. These guys were making $4 million bucks a year. So that put Jeff Finger into the top 15% of NHL contracts at the time in terms of annual value. So before you look at this 3.5 million per year number and be like, that's variable now. You can just trade that, add in a second round pick, or add in a first round pick. You can get rid of that money. No. At the time, that's big, big,
Yeah,
big boy money.
That's a big thing to bring up. That
Yes.
makes a lot of sense. Sorry, how old was he when he signed this contract?
27 years old. And he's
how many
played
games had he played?
94 games in the league over 2 or 3 seasons.
What were they thinking?
I'll tell you what they were thinking, because this story is funny. When I was doing research into this, so first of all, our episode is titled "Top 3 Worst Free Agency Signings," in the modern cap era, whatever the hell. So that's what you Google, right? Like worst free agent signings, and this guy's name came up over and over again on different lists of like worst free agent signings, and you look at it. And at first glance, you see 3.5 million for 4 years, and you kind of scoff. It's not that big of a deal, but like I said, at the time, that's a huge contract. Okay, so here are his numbers. I'll tell you after the signing what happened. He played 2 seasons with the Leafs after he signed. He had 8 goals, 25 assists, and 33 points in 105 games played as a Maple Leaf before being sent down to the AHL, Toronto Marlies, to finish his career. Then he unofficially retired at 31. So he had 33 points in 105 games. And look, as a defenseman, and mind you, he wasn't an offensive defenseman. He was generally understood to be a shutdown guy, more of a role player, and a guy who would beat you up physically. He wasn't a small guy. And so he wasn't known for his offensive talent. So, okay, you can look at those numbers and you might not get much out of it. 33 points in 105 games as a Leaf, not that big of a deal. But if you're making money like that, I think even as a defenseman, you should be able to put up more points than that. But he was buried in the minors. He played his last 2 years of his NHL career in the AHL for the Marlies. And like I said, he unofficially retired at 31 years old, and he hasn't played hockey since. He's 40 years old now. He's younger than Jumbo Joe. This guy's younger than Jumbo Joe. Should the Leafs sign him? They just signed Jumbo. Maybe they should. They need some help on D. No, they probably shouldn't. Jesus Christ. Let me tell you the most interesting part, though. Like I said, as I was researching this, oh my God, this name kept coming up again and again. And there's this one story, and I'll call it a story. It wasn't a rumor. But it's a story, but it's an unconfirmed story, I guess. So it's in between story and rumor, but I'll share it anyway. So allegedly, at the time, 73-year-old GM of the Maple Leafs, Cliff Fletcher, born in 1935, by the way, fellas, apparently mixed up Jeff Finger with another Colorado Avalanche defenseman when signing him, Kurt Sauer. Apparently, when he signed this guy, he thought he was signing Kurt Sauer. And
what?
yes, and listen, you
Wow.
might hear that and be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But trust me, I brought some numbers presented by someone other than me, and this story has been corroborated in different senses. So just bear with me here, okay? At the time of the signing, there was a Ron Wilson quote. And just for context, Ron Wilson coached the San Jose Sharks in the 07-08 season. And then in the offseason, heading into 2008, heading into that year, he signed as the head coach with the Leafs, where he stayed until 2012. And this is what Ron Wilson had to say about, well, Kurt Sauer, but he said it about Jeff Finger. He said, he was the most improved defenseman in the Western Conference last year. When we had Joe Thornton on the ice, Finger was the guy who played head-to-head with Joe, and he did a really good job. So there's another Joe Thornton connection. Just kind of weird how he keeps coming up in this. Okay, so there's Ron Wilson, new head coach of the Leafs in 2008. Apparently really likes Jeff Finger because he was able to guard Joe Thornton, okay, who, by the way, was another sick player at the time. So this is what Cliff Fletcher had to say. And remind you, 73-year-old GM of the Maple Leafs at the time, Cliff Fletcher. He said, Joel Quenneville, and for context, Quenneville was a head coach Colorado until 2008 before he headed to Chicago. And obviously in Chicago, we know what happened there, dynasty. But Cliff Fletcher said, Joel Quenneville told me he was one of the best, or the 5 best defensemen in the Western Conference last year. Okay. Fletcher also said, Ron Wilson told me that he was great on the ice against Joe Thornton, also Jerome McGinley and the Sedin twins. Okay, so this is where the story sort of comes to life. Dan Tolensky, okay, in a 2008 hockey blog called The Hockey Buzz, he looked into this because he saw these quotes from Cliff Fletcher and Ron Wilson, and he sort of thought to himself, well, this doesn't really make sense. I haven't really seen Jeff Finger on the ice a ton against Joe Thornton, Jerome McGinley, and the Sedin twins. So he looked into it, and he found out that Fletcher's intel from Ron Wilson and Joel Quenneville was wrong, because the numbers showed that Jeff Finger constantly played third-line minutes with Colorado, and he only played more than 18 minutes one time in that season that they're referring to, the 2007-2008 season. So do you not think in the 17 games that Jeff Finger matched up against Thornton, Iginla, and the Sedins combined, that he would have played more than 18 minutes, more than one time, if he was apparently on the ice against them all the time? So it gets better, boys. Like I said, Finger played 17 games against those players that year. Okay, so against San Jose, Calgary, and Vancouver combined for those players. Finger was on the ice 22.4% of the time against those stars in those 17 games, okay? 22% of the time. Kurt Sauer played 62.3% of the time in those 17 games against those big players. So, no, Ron Wilson. Jeff Finger was not the guy who was keeping Joe Thornton and Jerome McGinley and the Sedins off the score sheet. That was Kurt Sauer. And
That's
so
absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is, man. Wow.
I've got a couple more quotes just by Dan Tolensky. He said, if the Leafs wanted to sign a guy, and just to sum up, by the way, he said, if the Leafs wanted to sign the guy who played significant minutes against Joe Thornton, Iginla, and the Sedins, and any other stars around the league, they signed the wrong player. If they wanted to sign the guy who shut down Marian Gaborik in the playoffs and was out there 69% of the time when Gaborik was playing 5-on-5, they signed the wrong player. And if they wanted Colorado's most improved defender or their shutdown guy, they signed the wrong fucking player, boys.
That's all unbelievable. And I'm trying to put a little perspective for like nowadays into that, where I'm trying to think of comparisons, and I'll think of, when I think of the shutdown guy, a guy you want against the best players every single time, I think of Justin Braun for me, just because of his time in San Jose. And I still don't want to pay Justin Braun Sedin twin salary. Like, if I'm going to compare Sedin twins, we'll say maybe they took a little bit of a cut. If we want to say that, I'm going to compare them to maybe David Pastrnak with how good they were and how good he is and salary wise. I'm not paying Justin Braun David Pastrnak money. So I don't even know. The whole switching of the two players is baffling to me. Yeah. But also the salary, like paying that for what you were trying to get, is also crazy to me. Yeah. So this whole situation is just a good representation of Leafs history to me.